Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Jan Holland, and today we're going to talk about divorce and separation in the over 50s. And I'm delighted to welcome Lisa Wagner from Doolan Wagner Family Lawyers. So welcome, Lisa.
Hello, Jan. Thank you for having me.
It's great that you're here. So before we start, I'm going to read out a little bit about you. Lisa Wagner is the founding principal and managing director of Doolan Wagner Family Lawyers, and has close to 30 years' experience as a specialist family lawyer. Lisa is an accredited family law specialist, a nationally registered family dispute resolution practitioner, and is trained in collaborative family law practice and parenting coordination. She has extensive experience across all areas of family law, including mediation, negotiation, and collaborative law. Lisa is also a skilled litigator and acts as a court-appointed independent children's lawyer for children in difficult and complex parenting cases. So, Lisa, it seems that it's a growing demographic that the over 50s are going through separation and divorce, but also as that older age group, they would have special needs that younger people wouldn't have. So would you like to comment on that?
That's certainly true, Jan. I see the particular challenges for the over 50s, probably four components that they face that are quite different to our other clients.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, on a practical level, we often see with older divorcees, they've generally been together for a longer time. There's likely to have been a specialisation of labour in their relationship, and you would see, for example, one couple taking on the role of, say, the IT expert, and the other one not being a tech native. So they're suddenly having to reinvent themselves and take on new roles in order to live on a day-to-day basis. So that's quite challenging for older divorcees. The other side of practical aspects is that you tend to find that one part of the couple has been actively the social planner. And so they remain connected with close friends and family. The other one, not so much. And they have to be actively initiating reaching out to people and to remain close and for those important relationships to continue to blossom, and so they're not isolated. Yes. So they're, in practical terms, some of the particular challenges that we do see with older divorced couples. The other often overlooked aspect to mature divorce is the question of time, Jan. The time from separation until when an agreement is reached with a couple can take a matter of months. It's not something that gets resolved generally overnight. And 6 or 12 months of a process is felt far more sharply for a 65-year-old person than it is for a 35-year-old person today, who 6 months of their life is sort of a chunk of time, but they can quickly catch up. So that often impacts, Jan, in the decision-making process. And we find that older separating couples are more, that they value quicker outcomes, I think, generally because of that time factor. Another really important challenge for mature divorcees is the need to get the mix right. They need to have a sufficient level of financial stability so that they can rehouse. Same time, they need to have a sufficient level of resources available to them that are income. And that gap that's created by a separation is not something that they can catch up or get back. So obtaining advice from a financial planner, for most people, well, generally, but particularly for people in their 50s, the 50 age group above, that's really important so that they get the mix right.
Yes.
The other challenge that lots of older people facing separation and divorce experience is that there's a merger of that breakdown of a relationship along with other significant life decisions. So you may find that newly empty nesters grappling with the grief or the loss of adult children that have now moved out and established themselves, and that's going hand in hand with them coming to terms with an intimate relationship breaking down. So it's a little bit layer upon layer, and the grief can be far deeper than, say, the younger client base, who perhaps their experience of a separation more coincides with joyous events like, welcoming new children into the world or whatever that may be. So they're in my mind that the typical challenges that continue to present themselves for older divorcing couples.
Yes, thank you. And the interesting thing too, isn't it, is that as an older couple, especially if you've been in a long relationship, you have that particular identity, which you've had for a long time. And then to suddenly not have that identity anymore, it's a big change, and it's quite difficult to become that new person that you have to become, without your partner and going into a new life. And sometimes you have to move from the family home and all of those things. And also you don't have the same friendship groups. I mean, that's just a reality. So it's difficult.
Yes. Look, I find walking into a room as a single person at times quite excruciating. So, and that's only such a small fraction of the adjustments that need to be made.
Yes, thank you. And so if one was looking for a family lawyer, what sort of questions should one ask so that they have somebody by their side that resonates with them?
Well, the credentials of lawyers are generally published on their websites. So they need as a minimum to have a bachelor degree. It's probably also important to ask the makeup of the team that surrounds that lawyer. You probably don't want somebody that's a one-man band. One-person band, I should say, if they become sick or extended leave, like what happens to you? So that would be important to know that they're surrounded by a team. It would be sensible to assess the level of service you require. What kind of matter do you have? Do you need a team that's pitched to service those families that have a significant wealth base, or are you more suited to choose a firm that perhaps is a little bit more personal and delivering one-on-one service? So the nature of the matter that you present would inform the questions that you ask your lawyer. Their fees, that's without doubt something that you should be talking to lawyers about. If they offer fixed fee services, what's not included is as important as what is. So that would be a good question. Having a sense of their experience, both in the court and negotiating. You don't necessarily want to choose a lawyer that is spending all of their time running matters to final hearing and having reportable cases, because in many respects that's a fail. We're trying to keep people out of court through mediation. So you really need someone that's got a mix. For older people separating, a level of financial literacy, going back to what I was saying earlier about getting the mix right and being able to read modelling and to be able to articulate options for clients in the context of that advice is important. Nothing beats your gut experience, like your gut feeling. So at the end of the day, having just going with who feels right for you.
Yes.
As part though of those questions, you really want someone who's going to tailor their experience to give you the best outcome and not deliver necessarily a cookie cutter approach.
Yes, thank you. And it's interesting, isn't it, too, because at that time when you're making big decisions, you're emotionally overwhelmed. So probably before you even see a lawyer or, think about looking for one, it's probably a good idea to actually sit down and maybe with some trusted person and just work out what it is that you do need, so that when you are speaking to a lawyer for the first time, you can articulate your needs, so that then the way they respond, whether it's going to suit you or not.
That would be a really good use of somebody's time ahead of meeting with any prospective lawyer, to treat it a little bit like a business meeting and prepare for it, certainly.
Yes, thank you. And then the other thing is that I know that in these times, and I think especially when your future life depends on it, you want to make the best decision that you can for yourself. But oftentimes too, you have to face the reality that flexibility isn't a bad thing, because if it keeps on going through the courts or through the legal process, at the end, you may not get the judgment that you want or the outcome that you want. And so if you were more flexible at the beginning, it probably would have saved a lot of stress and also a lot of fees.
That's true. Experience shows us that in the discretionary jurisdiction of this of family law, that there's never going to be one exact outcome. And one judge to the next, one day to the next, one client to the next. It's not going to be an algorithm that gives you the answer. It's a human being. And so appreciating that there is some grey areas and trying to absorb what outcomes around the fringe of likely outcomes are is a really sensible thing to do from day one.
Yes, thank you. And also, what if you want to stay in the family home? I know it's not always possible, but what if you really want to stay in the family home? What occurs there?
The first thing, Jan, with any matter is to try and identify what a client's likely entitlements are. And once that percentage is arrived at, or a range of percentages, if the value of the home falls within that range, then a party is able to retain that property or raise finance and buy out their ex. It's all possible. That if two people are both wanting a property, or if there is a particular contest, say, about the value of that asset, it might be the best course, and the court might insist that a property is sold. But generally, if somebody wants to retain an asset as part of their entitlements and there's no objection from the other party, subject to the value being determined or agreed, they can keep that property.
Great, thank you. And when are the assets valued?
At the time of settlement, Jan. For some people, that's almost coincides with separation, but for others, it's sort of months later. So it's at the time the settlement is being contemplated.
Okay, and that's normally after mediation, or actually it may come at the beginning if it's amicable, but if there's a bit of confrontation and people don't agree, then I guess it comes later when things have been decided by a lawyer, or together, both lawyers work out the solution.
That's right. I think it's fair to say that the values are a little bit like moving quicksand, but a line is drawn in the sand and it's generally then tracked along. And with the assistance of lawyers or third-party experts, parties usually can, for the sake of a mediation or the sake of a settlement proposal, nominate a certain value that's not necessarily fixed in stone, but they can work with those values and subsequently look at getting them verified if everything else is agreed.
All right. And for somebody who's never been through divorce before, what does a settlement mean?
A settlement comprises really, I think, two parts, Jan. The first part is striking the deal or reaching an agreement. Either of those terms capture the essence of a settlement. And that can be by way of talking around a kitchen sink, lawyers exchanging letters. We've had quite a lot of success with mediation, collaborative practice. So with the help of professionals, a deal is struck. The second part of the settlement entails documenting the terms of that agreement, be it in a financial agreement, consent orders, a child support agreement, a deed of release. So there are legal documents, parenting plan even, legal documents that lend themselves to reflecting the deal that the parties have struck.
Fantastic, thank you. And what happens if there is debt?
It needs to be dealt with. So it needs to be retired or assumed by one of the parties and an indemnity provided to the other, or somehow apportioned between the parties, and generally the facilities underpinning the debt are redrawn in the name of that particular party or their alter ego or whatever it may be. But the intention of the legislation is that the joint financial affairs of the parties, so we have to pull that apart and work with it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And in terms of super, I know that in most cases, the man would generally have more super than the woman. So just in terms of the super being divided, is there any specific rule or is there a norm that happens?
There's no specific rule and there's no exact norm, but for older separating couples, it's generally ideal and so agreed that they'll get a similar proportion of superannuation and non-superannuation assets. Right. Generally, older couples do not want to end up with only superannuation,
yes,
or only out of super assets. And from a tax point of view, there's lots of financial advantages in getting that mix right. But a superannuation split pursuant to a financial agreement or an order of the court is what underpins the redistribution of superannuation entitlements.
Great. And would it be advisable in terms of your super to see a financial advisor before you make these decisions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And if you've just come into an inheritance, what happens then?
They're tricky ones, Jan. So there's an urban myth that they are quarantined or they sit off to the side. That's not quite true.
Right.
But depending upon when the inheritance comes into being and it being considered in the context of the other assets, it may be that the court treats it differently and adopts what we know as being a two pools approach.
Right.
So it might be that the matrimonial pool, excluding the inheritance, is apportioned in a certain percentage as between the parties, and the inheritance pool is dealt with in a very different proportion. Right. Or it might be that it sits entirely with the beneficiary spouse, but then the other spouse receives a slightly bigger slice of the non-inheritance pool to take into account the fact that one of the parties walks away from a long marriage generally with this additional wealth.
Right. Okay, thank you. So Lisa, is there anything more that you've discovered in your journey as a family lawyer that you would, any wisdom that you would like to impart?
Look, one thing I would say is a family lawyer can be a really good resource for people making decisions at critical stages of their lives. So, and I'm a big believer in that. Forewarned is forearmed, or however it goes. So I've written a list, if I can just read it out. These are some of the signs that if people are heading in this direction, it might be sensible that they just go and have a talk to a family lawyer. So important life events, including approaching retirement, changing careers, coming into an inheritance, helping adult children into the property market, so the bank of mum and dad, the sale of the matrimonial home, when you're looking at downsizing, or possibly when you're looking at paying the residential bond for elderly parents, because all of those life events significantly impact your asset base. They sometimes tie you into an arrangement that when you're in an intact couple, you can afford and you're happy to do, but not quite to the extent you might be able to then do that as a single person. So all good opportunities to go and work with a family lawyer to see, well, what would this look like if we made these decisions? So I definitely say that for your audience, Jan.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. Well, I think that's a wonderful list, and I think we can end on that list. So if people want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
I've been a Sydney girl for my entire life. I operate on Sydney's North Shore and have served that community and surrounding communities. So if anybody is looking for me, they will find me at Wagner. And I'm excited to say, Jan, that I'm just opening up a mediation practice. So I'm going to be thrilled to be working with couples. So anybody that feels that I might be able to benefit them in that space, you'll find me. My name, that won't change.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. Well, thanks again for that wonderful advice, and I'm sure that people got a lot from that. Thank you.
Thanks.